Welcome to The Explainer. Look, today we're going to challenge absolutely everything you thought you knew about ancient Buddhist monks. Forget the stereotypes of wandering mystics just sitting silently on mountaintops without a care in the world. Instead, we're opening up a highly sophisticated 2,000-year-old operational manual known as the 10 Recitations Vinaya. What we're actually looking at here is the incredibly intricate legal code of an ancient society. So think about this for a second. How do you actually maintain order among thousands of people who have formally renounced conventional society, property, and civil law? They still have to live together, eat together, and function as a cohesive organization, right? To survive, these ancient communities couldn't just call the local police or appeal to kings. They needed their own rigorous, completely airtight legal system. And we're going to explore exactly how they engineered it. To decode this ancient playbook, we'll be looking at four main organizational pillars: their strict onboarding process, their system for community audits, the logistics of medicine and property, and finally, their version of a Supreme Court for resolving disputes. All right, pillar number one, strict onboarding thresholds, or as I like to think of it, the ancient HR department. Becoming a monk wasn't just some spontaneous spiritual awakening. It was a highly complex legal procedure. To get legally onboarded, the rules were absolute. Four specific elements had to be explicitly named and physically present right there in the room: a preceptor to sponsor you, the Sangha assembly to witness, the candidate themselves, and the formal legal action, or karma. If even one of these was missing, or if the correct names weren't spoken out loud, the entire ordination was completely invalid. Zero exceptions. Now, who was actually barred from joining? The organization had a ridiculously specific list of people who were strictly forbidden from entering. It definitely wasn't an open-door policy because they had to protect their operational capacity. There's this brilliant Q&A in the text between the Buddha and a monk named Upali, who is basically the ultimate interrogator of rules. Upali loves pushing for edge cases. So obviously people with severe criminal histories, like thieves or anyone guilty of patricide, were out. But get this. People with certain sensory impairments, like being deaf or mute, were also strictly disqualified. Why? Because the entire legal system functioned on oral recitation and auditory witnessing. If you can't hear the laws being read or speak to confess a violation, you literally cannot participate in their legal structure. And here's where we see the legal system really testing its own limits. Upali asks if there's literally any loophole for someone who killed their parents to get ordained, and the Buddha clarifies that the permanent penalty for patricide only applied to human parents, which leaves a totally bizarre but strictly logically sound loophole. If your parents were somehow animals and you killed them, you could technically still be ordained. Moving on to Pillar 2, community and audits, specifically a ceremony called the Uposatha. To make sure everyone was playing by the rules, they relied on this mandatory recurring assembly. But the rules dictating how and where this audit took place were stunningly precise. It wasn't just a casual, hey, I messed up kind of meeting. It was about executing a totally flawless legal ceremony to maintain absolute communal purity. And this is where their absolute obsession with spatial legality comes in. The physical geometry of the room literally dictated the law. An audit was instantly voided if someone was even one single foot outside the invisible pre-agreed boundary line of the monastery. Plus, physical equality was mandatory. You couldn't have one monk reciting the rules from a high platform while the others were down on the ground. The physical space had to mirror the legal equality of the participants. Naturally, Upali has to push the boundaries again. He asks, hey, what if we're traveling? What if the monks are on a raft in the middle of a river? Can you conduct a valid legal audit while floating on a boat that's actively moving through space? The Buddha's ruling here is super pragmatic. He says that because empty space and moving water don't have fixed, measurable boundaries, a moving boat can't serve as a jurisdiction. So the boat has to be physically anchored, tied to a tree, a post, a rock, whatever. You can only apply the law when the geographical space is completely frozen. All right, part 3. Logistics. Let's talk about medicine and property allocation. Even a society with absolutely no personal wealth has to manage physical resources, right? Medicines were strictly categorized by expiration, daily, 7-day, and lifetime. But the mixing rule is wild. If you mixed a lifetime medicine with a daily one, the whole batch legally expired by noon that same day. They absolutely refused to leave any loopholes for monks trying to infinitely extend the life of their rations. The law always defaulted to the strictest possible timeline. And for communal property, the bureaucracy ensured nobody was left out. Take a blind monk receiving a communal robe. Since he can't visually confirm it, the physical item has to be placed directly into his hands or his lap. And he must consciously generate the thought, I obtained this robe. Physical contact plus cognitive intent equals a legally binding transfer. Which brings us to our fourth and final pillar, the Supreme Court for disputes. This is really the most intense, high-stakes part of the whole text. Human organizations are inevitably going to have conflict. So how did a massive ancient institution manage a severe operational schism with no police force when monks flat out refused to speak to each other? They used a brilliantly pragmatic spatial solution that we can call the Kosambi Protocol. Instead of forcing everyone to immediately make up and hug it out, the law literally separated the fighting factions within the assembly hall. They put an empty seat right in the middle, and a neutral, legally expert monk would sit there to mediate and conduct business. It was a physical buffer zone designed to keep the organization running even while the humans inside it were fighting. Also, you couldn't just exploit technicalities to clear your disciplinary record. Sure, you had to confess your offenses, but you couldn't just whisper it to a tree or confess to someone who was deaf, mute, or only spoke a foreign language. That's totally invalid. The law required a genuine cognitive transaction. The other person actually had to hear and understand you. And for the ultimate punishment, getting completely expelled from the order, we see that intense spatial emphasis again. You can't expel someone if the accused is standing on a platform while the judges are on the ground, or if someone is sort of hovering half in and half out of a doorway. Absolute physical equality and geographic certainty in the courtroom were strictly enforced. Everyone had to be exactly on the same level. So, what this explainer really shows us is that the Vinaya wasn't just some collection of mystical philosophy. It was a masterful, highly practical blueprint for keeping thousands of complex, flawed human beings completely unified. It anticipated edge cases, closed loopholes, and used physical space to actually enforce legal equality. And it leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought. When you look at the granular, airtight detail of these 2,000-year-old rules, you kind of have to look at our own modern systems, our corporate structures, our governments, our HR departments, and ask, are they truly this bulletproof? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the systems around you.